So I was hoping that maybe each of you could share one of these stories, maybe gross out our audience with those dirty details about what happened, and then how you resolved that, because it's very important to me that anyone listening to this podcast can understand that there's no magic trick, right? This is a bunch of people who are toiling to keep things working. So do y'all maybe have something to contribute along those lines?
Go for it, Jeremy.
Yeah. Gross. Cockroach DB. That hasn't been open source for like 6 years now. But I guess that's what's gross to me is when licenses on open source projects get changed to something proprietary. I remember the first time that I had to deal with that was about 20 years ago. I was working as information security professional and relied daily on the Nessus network vulnerability scanner. It was great. GPL functionality, had a vibrant community of people developing plugins and rules and contributing fixes back to the code base. And then one day, the community found out that the person who had been entrusted with the trademark for the name had hired on some private developers to rip out anything that he didn't own copyright on and replace it and publish the next version under a proprietary license. That spurred our community on to basically fork the project. It changed names a few times, but still exists today, 20 years later, as a GPL open source network vulnerability scanner that's quite popular. I guess the key takeaway for me from that gross moment was that when the trademark owner went rogue and took the software proprietary, the community moved. They abandoned that project entirely and started their own fork. So and we've seen the same thing happen over and over again with particularly single vendor open source projects in more recent years.
Yeah, and then for me, the thing that kind of occurred to me when you asked us to think about this is something that happened a lot more recently. But over the last few years, Docker Hub has kind of decided that they can't provide unlimited bandwidth to everyone on the planet, which I think is fair enough. Hosting a global registry of a bunch of fairly large objects that people are downloading constantly is I'm sure very pricey and not cheap to do. And so we figured, well, we'll move our images that we consume and use, that we build, or that we can host them on a different registry to kind of work around some of those limitations that Docker Hub was putting in place. And so actually I did this. We all of our services for the most part at this point run out of container images. We build for a lot of services, we build our own container images. And I moved all of the publishing for those container images to the Quay, which spelled E, but I think people pronounce it Quay. And I thought, great, we solved the problem. And then like a day later, I'm like, why is our testing not working? Well, it turns out our testing, which it speculatively tests pre-built images to make sure that everything works, it relies on being able to configure a mirror for your registry in the Docker daemon config. Well, there's a decade-old bug open. Well, there's actually several now, I think, but Docker has only ever supported this functionality for Docker Hub. If you have a registry that isn't Docker Hub, you cannot mirror it in the configuration for Docker daemon. And I assumed that this was all fine, it was working, and it wasn't until I completely moved everything over and then ran a test and was like, hey, this test didn't do what I expected it to do, figured that out, and was like, oh, there's a 10-year-old bug. I think it's from like December 2015, so maybe a 9-ish year old bug in Docker preventing this from happening. I guess there's a lot of complexity that goes into building software, deploying software. You can make assumptions. And sometimes it doesn't always go the way you expect. So I had to completely roll back. We're publishing back to Docker Hub so that our testing will do what we expect. And now we've kind of restarted the process of accomplishing this migration with first moving to Podman, because Podman will let you mirror any container registry. which allows us to configure our testing the way we need to do speculative testing of the images. Once individual services get moved over to Podman, they can then have their images hosted on Quay, and then we don't lose out on the testing behavior that we're looking for.